The cowboy's holiday wish. Mail order bride arrives and his desire ignites. The first light of December crept over the eastern ridge like a shy suitor, painting the frost on the Triple Bar Ranch sign in pale gold. The sign itself had seen better decades. One of the iron bars had snapped clean off years ago, leaving the brand looking more like a broken wishbone than a cattle mark. Inside the barn, the air smelled of sweet hay, horse sweat, and the sharp tang of axle grease. Clara Holliday knelt on a three-legged stool, her breath fogging in the cold. She had pushed open the big sliding door just enough to let in a blade of sunlight, and it fell across the community bulletin board like a spotlight on a stage. The board was a patchwork of lives. A yellowed notice for the church pie social, a reward poster for a missing bay gelding, a child's careful crayon drawing of a Christmas tree. Clara unpinned the oldest flyer, someone's lost locket, and replaced it with her own square of paper. She had written the words 3 times before this final draft, each version softer than the last. The ink was still wet enough to smudge if she breathed too hard. Wanted, kind woman 20 to 30 to share life on Montana ranch. Must love wide skies, hard work, and a man who forgets to come in from chores until the stars are out. Christmas wedding preferred. Reply to C. Holiday Triple Bar, Silver Creek, Montana Territory. Clara pressed a thumbtack through the corner with a decisive thunk. Lord, she whispered, eyes on the rafters where barn swallows nested in summer, let this be the right thing. And if it isn't, let it at least be interesting. She stood, brushing straw from her wool skirt, and tucked an errant curl beneath her knit cap. The barn cat, an orange tom named Judas on account of his thieving ways, wound between her ankles, purring like a coffee grinder. Mind your manners when she gets here, Clara told him. We're advertising for a lady, not a mouse. Judas blinked, unimpressed. Outside, the yard was a white hush broken only by the rhythmic thump-thump of the windmill and the distant lowing of cattle. Clara crossed to the house, boots crunching, and paused at the kitchen window. Through the frost-laced pane she could see her brother. Jack Holliday stood at the stove, broad back to the door, pouring coffee from the blue enamel pot that had belonged to their mother. Steam curled around his dark hair like incense. His left hand, the one scarred from the barn fire the year Pa died, moved with the careful grace of a man who'd learned early that pain teaches precision. Clara slipped inside. The kitchen smelled of wood smoke and chicory. Morning, she said, hanging her coat. Jack grunted. He hadn't shaved in 3 days. The stubble made him look older than 34, like a man who'd misplaced a decade somewhere between grief and sunrise chores. Clara pulled a tin of rolled oats from the shelf. You eat yet? Coffee's food. Coffee's a lie we tell our stomachs. She set the tin down with a clunk. I mailed something for you yesterday. Jack's eyes flicked to her, sharp as a hawk's. If it's another bill collector. It's not. She busied herself with the kettle so he wouldn't see her smile. It's a surprise. I don't like surprises. You used to. Remember the year Pa hid your birthday saddle in the hayloft and you fell through the trapdoor? Jack's mouth twitched, almost a smile, gone before it arrived. I was 12. And I broke my wrist. Details. Clara measured oats into a pot. You've been alone too long, Jack. I've got the cattle. I've got the land. I've got a heart the size of this valley gone cold as January iron. Silence stretched, filled only by the kettle's rising whine. Jack set his mug down hard enough to slosh coffee over the rim. Some things can't be ordered like seed corn, Clara. She turned, spoon dripping. Maybe not. But sometimes they answer anyway. Jack reached across the table, picked up the crumpled scrap of newspaper she'd left there, the proof copy of the ad. His eyes scanned the lines once, twice. The color drained from his face, then rushed back redder than the stove's glow. He crushed the paper in his fist and tossed it into the fire. The flames took it greedily, curling the edges black. Clara watched the ad burn and felt no regret. The words were already on their way east, riding the rails in a mail pouch, chasing a woman who might or might not remember the taste of Montana snow. Outside, the windmill kept turning, slow and steady, like a prayer wheel for the lonely. 2 weeks slid by like sled runners over packed snow. The ad had vanished into the iron belly of the post office, and Clara told herself she'd done her part. She fed the stove, mended Jack's shirts, and kept her worry folded small, the way their mother used to fold letters into perfect squares. But every noon she found an excuse to walk the half-mile to the Silver Creek depot. She told Jack it was for nails or lamp oil. He grunted, too busy wrestling a frozen pump handle to argue. On the 14th day the sky hung low and pewter, the kind of sky that swallows sound. Clara stood on the platform with a cardboard sign she'd painted in careful block letters. Missy Lawson. The paint was still tacky, she'd finished it at dawn, praying the wind wouldn't smear the name. The depot itself was a squat box of a building, red paint peeling like sunburned skin. A pot-bellied stove inside glowed cherry red, throwing heat against the frost on the windows. Old Mr. Gunderson, the station master, rocked in his chair and whittled a cedar whistle for his grandson. "Train's late," he said, not looking up. "Snow up near Billings." Clara nodded, stamping warmth into her boots. She had worn her Sunday coat, green wool with a velvet collar, and the brooch their mother left her, a tiny silver horseshoe. She told herself it was for the bride, not for luck. At 12:17 the whistle came, thin and mournful, riding the wind ahead of the engine. The rails began to sing. The locomotive rounded the bend like a black dragon breathing steam. Sparks flew from the stack, cinders hissed when they met snow. Brakes screamed. The train shuddered to a stop with a sigh that sounded almost human. Doors opened. Passengers spilled onto the platform in a cloud of wool and chatter. A drummer with a sample case, 2 nuns clutching rosaries, a boy clutching a cage of chickens that squawked in protest. Clara's heart thumped against her ribs. She lifted the sign higher. And then she saw her. The woman stepped down from the second-class car with the careful balance of someone who'd ridden too many miles and too many seats. Her cloak was forest green, travel-stained at the hem, the hood pushed back to reveal hair the color of winter wheat caught in a loose knot. A carpet bag hung from one gloved hand, the other steadied a small wooden box tied with twine. She was 32 if she was a day, but the bones of her face were the same Clara remembered from creekside picnics and stolen kisses behind the schoolhouse. Clara's breath left her in a soft gasp that fogged and vanished. "Evie?" Evelyn Lawson's eyes, pale winter sky blue, found Clara's across the platform. For a heartbeat the years collapsed. Girls again, barefoot in June grass, trading secrets and lemon drops. Then the moment snapped and Evie's mouth curved in a smile both wary and warm. "Clara Holliday," she said, voice husky from train dust. "I should have known this C stood for trouble." Clara laughed, an undignified bark that made Mr. Gunderson look up from his whittling. She dropped the sign and crossed the platform in 4 strides. Evie smelled of coal smoke and pear soap and something faintly floral that made Clara's eyes sting. They hugged like sisters who'd never quarreled, though they had, fiercely, the summer Evie left. Over Evie's shoulder Clara saw the conductor unloading trunks. One was banded in brass, the kind city women used. Another was plain pine, scarred and practical, the kind a rancher's wife might choose. Clara pulled back, hands still on Evie's arms. "He doesn't know you," answered. "Good," Evie said. "Some ghosts need surprising." A quick flashback hit like a slap of cold water. Creek Bank, summer 1876. Young Jack, 22, sunburned, laughing, slips a promise ring, woven grass and a dime store pearl, onto young Evie's finger. "Young Jack, marry me when the hay's in. We'll build a house with windows facing sunrise. Young Evie, only if you promise to dance with me at the harvest social, Jack Holliday, even if your boots are full of manure." They kiss, clumsy and sweet. Smash cut to. Same Creek Bank 3 months later. Rain. "Young Evie, Boston Jack. 1 year of school. Then I'll come back and wheel. Young Jack, I can't leave the ranch. Pa's lungs are drowning. Clara's only 16. Young Evie, take me with you then. I'm not afraid of work. Young Jack, you should be. This land eats dreams and spits out bones." Evie's face crumples. She pulls the grass ring from her finger, presses it into his palm. "Young Evie, then keep your bones. I'm taking the train." She boards eastbound. Jack stands in the rain until the red lantern disappears. Back to present, depot platform. The memory lasted 2 heartbeats. Evie's eyes held the same storm cloud gray they'd turned that day. Clara swallowed. "The wagon's this way." Evie adjusted her grip on the carpet bag. "Lead on, matchmaker." Mr. Gunderson tipped his hat. "Welcome back, Miss Evie. Towns missed your piano at church." Evie's smile flickered. Some things a body never forgets how to play. They stepped off the platform into the hush of snow. The wagon waited, hitched to Jack's matched bays, Buck and Bible, named for their dispositions. Clara climbed to the seat. Evie handed up the pine trunk, then the brass one, then accepted Clara's hand to climb aboard. As they rolled past the depot, Evie looked back once. The train was already moving, gathering speed, whistle crying farewell. Clara clicked to the horses. "Jack's going to swallow his tongue when he sees you." "Let him choke a little," Evie said softly. "Some debts take 12 years and a blizzard to collect." The wagon tracks filled behind them with fresh snow, erasing the path as if the past had never left, only waited, patient as winter, for the right woman to step off the right train. The wagon wheels carved twin furrows through the fresh snow, the runners hissing like whispered secrets. Clara sat in the middle of the seat, a deliberate buffer between her brother and the woman who had once been promised to him. The horses, Buck and Bible, leaned into their collars, breath steaming in silver plumes. Jack Holliday held the reins in one gloved hand, the other braced against the dashboard. He had not spoken since they left the depot. His silence had weight, like a storm cloud pressing on the mountains. Evie sat on Clara's left, spine straight, gloved hands folded over the small wooden box in her lap. The box was tied with twine and sealed with red wax, something important inside, Clara guessed, but she did not ask. Snowflakes settled on Evie's lashes and melted there, tiny diamonds that never quite became tears. The road wound west, past the frozen creek where willows bent under white burdens. The sky had turned the color of tarnished pewter, and the wind carried the scent of pine and distant wood smoke. Clara tried once to break the quiet. Clara. Bright, too bright. The road's better than last year. Jack filled the ruts with gravel after the spring floods. Cutting low. Clara. One word, sharp as a snapped icicle. Clara's mouth closed. She tucked her chin into her scarf. The wagon creaked. A crow called overhead, lonely and mocking. Evie shifted. The movement drew Jack's eyes for the first time. He looked at her the way a man studies a ghost, half recognition, half fear she might vanish if he blinked. Eyes back on the road. Clara says you're from Chicago. His voice was rough and used, like a hinge that had rusted shut. Evie. Born here, actually. Left when I was 20. The reins creaked in Jack's grip. A muscle jumped in his jaw. Funny. I knew a girl who left at 20. Broke a man's heart doing it. The words landed between them like a thrown gauntlet. Evie's chin lifted. Snowflakes clung to the fur trim of her hood. Evie. Maybe the man broke hers first. Clara felt the air change the way it does before lightning. She pressed her knees together to keep from jumping down and walking the rest of the way. Jack's laugh was short, bitter, swallowed by the wind. You always did have a tongue sharp enough to skin a cat. Evie. And you always did think silence was the same as strength. The horses flicked their ears at the sudden edge in her voice. Clara reached for the brake handle, then thought better of it. Silence fell again, heavier now. The wagon topped a rise. Below them, the ranch spread out like a promise kept. The low log house with its stone chimney breathing smoke, the red barn, the corrals white and empty, cattle huddled in the lee of the haystack. Christmas lights, nothing fancy, just candles and jars, glowed in the windows Clara had set out that morning. Jack's hands tightened until the leather reins squeaked. Quiet, almost to himself. Still looks the same. Evie. Soft. Some things do. Some things don't. She looked at him, then really looked. 12 years had carved new lines around his eyes, silvered the hair at his temples. The boy who'd swung her over creek stones was gone, replaced by a man whose shoulders carried more than the weight of a winter coat. Jack felt her gaze. His throat worked. You cold? It was the first kindness he'd offered, clumsy and late. Evie. I've been colder. She did not elaborate. Clara wondered if she meant Chicago winters or the day she'd stepped onto the eastbound train with nothing but a valise and a broken promise. The wagon rolled down the slope. The house grew larger, warmer, more real. Somewhere inside, the stove ticked as it cooled from breakfast. Judas the cat would be curled on Jack's pillow, claiming territory. Clara cleared her throat. Claire. I made stew. And there's pie. Apple from the fall cellar. Neither answered. The horses turned into the yard on their own, knowing the way. Jack set the brake with a practiced flick. Snow sifted from the eaves as the wagon stopped. For a moment, no one moved. Then Evie reached for the tie-down rope. Evie. I can manage my own trunk. I wasn't offering. But he was already climbing down, boots crunching. He rounded the wagon, hesitated, then lifted the pine trunk as if it weighed nothing. His scarred hand brushed Evie's glove when she steadied the brass-banded one. Neither pulled away. Clara watched from the seat, heart thumping like a schoolgirl's. Jack set the trunk on the porch step. Snow began to dust his shoulders. House is warm. Clara'll show you where to put your things. He started toward the barn, then stopped. Without turning. Welcome home, Evie. The words were so low the wind almost stole them. But Evie heard. Her fingers tightened on the twine of her small box. She did not reply. She did not need to. The past had just stepped off the train and walked straight into the house wearing her face, and every room suddenly remembered how to ache. Clara hopped down, linked her arm through Evie's. Clara. Come on. Let's get you out of that snow before Jack decides to be noble and sleep in the hayloft. Evie's laugh was small, surprised, real. Evie. Some things really don't change. Together they climbed the porch steps. Behind them, Jack stood in the yard a moment longer, staring at the tracks the wagon had left, two parallel lines already filling with snow, erasing the path as if the journey had never happened. But the porch door shut with a soft thud, and the smell of wood smoke and stew wrapped around Evie like an old quilt. She closed her eyes. Home, she thought. God help me, it still smells like home. And somewhere in the barn, Jack pressed his forehead to a cold beam and whispered a name he had not spoken aloud in 12 years. Night settled hard and early, the way it does in December when the sun gives up before supper. The ranch house glowed like a lantern in the dark, but the barn stood apart, a deeper shadow breathing out the day's warmth. Inside, a single lantern hung from a nail, its flame steady in the draftless air. The light pooled over worn plank floors, over stalls where the horses shifted and sighed, over Jack Holliday bent double on a low stool. He was mending a broken bridle, fingers moving with the patient certainty of a man who trusted leather more than people. The scent was thick, oiled harness, sweet alfalfa, the faint iron of old blood from a calf's ear notch. Somewhere in the loft, mice rustled like gossiping church ladies. The barn door slid open with a groan. Cold rushed in, then Evie carrying a galvanized bucket of oats. Snowflakes clung to her hair and melted into tiny rivers down her temples. She wore Clara's spare coat, too short in the sleeves, and a pair of Jack's old gloves, the fingers cut off for work. Jack didn't look up. Evie, your sister says you mend everything but people. The words landed soft, but the barn swallowed softness. Jack's needle paused mid-stitch, then resumed. People leave. Leather stays. He bit the thread, tied it off, set the bridle aside. Only then did he raise his eyes. The lantern painted harsh shadows across the scar on his left hand, the one that ran from wrist to knuckles like a lightning bolt frozen in flesh. Evie stepped closer. The bucket clinked against her knee. Evie, I left because you chose the ranch over a future with me. Jack stood. He was taller than memory allowed, shoulders filling the space between stalls. The lantern swung gently on its nail, making their shadows dance. I chose the ranch because my pa died and left us drowning in debt. You wanted Boston finishing school. I had 60 head of cattle and a mortgage that ate half the herd every winter. His voice was low, controlled, but the words came faster than he liked. He turned to hang the bridle on its peg, giving his back to her. Evie, you never asked me to stay and fight with you. Jack's hand stilled on the peg. The barn was so quiet they could hear the lantern wick hiss. I was 22. Thought love meant not asking you to suffer. He faced her again. The space between them was only 6 feet, but it felt like the width of the Missouri in spring flood. Evie, I would have shoveled manure beside you. I would have learned to brand and birth and bury. All you had to do was say, stay. Her voice cracked on the last word. She set the bucket down hard. Oats spilled in a golden fan across the floor. One of the horses nickered, hopeful. Jack took a single step. The lantern light caught the sheen of sweat at his hairline despite the cold. I said it every night for a year. Just not out loud. Evie's eyes glistened. She reached into her coat pocket and drew out something small, wrapped in faded calico. She unfolded it carefully, the grass ring he'd woven the summer they were 20. The blades had dried to brittle gold, but the knot still held. Evie, I kept this. Through boarding school, through a marriage that lasted 4 years and ended in a Chicago cemetery. Through every night I told myself I hated you. Jack stared at the ring as if it were a live coal. I burned your letters. Then dug the ashes out of the stove like a fool. Kept them in a tin under my bunk. Still smell like smoke and lilac water. The confession hung between them, raw and ridiculous. Evie laughed once, a sound like ice breaking on the creek. Evie, we were children playing at forever. Maybe. But children grow up. And some promises outlast the grass they're made of. He took another step. Close enough now to see the faint freckles across her nose, unchanged since she was 16. Close enough to smell the train on her skin and the faint rosewater Clara had lent her. Evie, I'm here for Clara's ad. Not for you. The words were meant to wound, but her voice trembled. Jack heard the lie and the truth braided together. Clara's meddling heart is bigger than her sense. But the ad brought you back. That counts for something. Evie's chin lifted. Snowmelt dripped from her hair onto the barn floor, dark spots on the dust. Evie, what do you want from me, Jack Holliday? The question was a dare. Jack's answer came slow, shaped by 12 years of silence. I want to know if the girl who could outride half the county still lives in the woman standing here. I want to know if forgiveness is heavier than pride. And I want, God help me, I want to hear you say my name without sounding like you're spitting out a curse. Evie's breath hitched. The lantern flame guttered in a sudden draft, then steadied. Somewhere outside, the wind rattled the tin roof like loose bones. She looked at the grass ring in her palm, then at the scar on his hand. Evie, I'm not the girl who left. And you're not the boy who let her go. We're strangers wearing old faces. Strangers can start over. Evie, can they? She slipped the grass ring onto her smallest finger. Fit barely. The dried blade scratched her skin. Jack watched the motion, throat working. I got coffee on the stove. And a spare room that doesn't smell like horse. Claire'll have supper soon. Evie, I brought my own coffee. Chicago blend. You'll hate it. I've hated worse. A beat. Then, surprising them both, Evie smiled, small, crooked reel. Evie, I'll bring the bucket in. Oats won't spill themselves. She bent to gather the scattered grain. Jack crouched beside her, their shoulders brushing. Neither moved away. The horses watched with liquid eyes as if the barn itself held its breath. When the last oat was swept into the bucket, Jack stood and offered his hand. Evie took it. His palm was calloused, warm, steady. The scar rasped against her glove. They walked to the barn door together. Outside, the snow had stopped. Stars hung low and sharp, close enough to touch. The house lights beckoned, golden and forgiving. At the threshold, Evie paused. Evie. Jack. You waited. Evie. I don't curse your name anymore. I just say it quieter. Jack's fingers tightened around hers for a heartbeat, then let go. Jack. Quiet's a start. They stepped into the night. Behind them, the lantern burned steady, throwing their shadows long across the snow, two silhouettes that almost but not quite touched. The Christmas Eve storm. The storm arrived without ceremony, the way grief sometimes does. One moment the sky was a hard iron gray, the next it was spitting snow sideways, thick as torn feathers. It was Christmas Eve, and the world outside the Triple Bar Ranch windows turned white and furious in the span of a single hymn. Inside the house, the evening had been careful. Supper, venison stew, cornbread, and Clara's apple stack cake, passed with polite words and too many glances that never quite met. Jack had carved the meat with the same concentration he gave to branding irons. Evie had praised the gravy, then folded her hands in her lap like a schoolgirl. Clara talked enough for three, her voice bright as the candles she'd set in every window. After dishes, Clara brought out the family Bible and read the Nativity in her soft, steady cadence. Jack stood by the fireplace, one boot propped on the hearth, staring into the flames as if the shepherds might appear there. Evie sat on the settee, the grass ring hidden beneath her sleeve, her fingers worrying the dried blades until they cracked. When Clara closed the book, the silence felt louder than the wind. Clara. Cheerful, too cheerful. I'll bank the stove and turn in. Big day tomorrow. Church, then the sleigh ride if the snow lets us. She kissed Jack's cheek, squeezed Evie's shoulder, and disappeared up the stairs. Her door clicked shut like a period at the end of a sentence no one had finished writing. Jack and Evie were left in the firelight. The clock on the mantel ticked toward 10. Outside, the wind began to howl in earnest. Jack cleared his throat. Storm's early. Supposed to hold off till morning. Evie. Weather never asked permission. She stood, smoothing her skirt. The grass ring caught on a thread. She tucked it deeper into her cuff. Evie. I'll check the latch on the back door. She moved toward the kitchen. Jack watched her go, then followed, restless. In the mudroom, Evie lifted the iron latch. Held firm. Snow hissed against the pane like a living thing. Behind her. Cattle be drifting. Winds out of the north, pushing him toward the ravine. Evie. Turning. How many head? 62. Calves mostly. They'll pile up against the fence if we don't cut him off. He was already reaching for his coat on the peg. The sheepskin was stiff with cold. Evie hesitated, then took Clara's spare mackinaw from its hook. Evie. I'm coming. You'll freeze. Evie. I froze in Chicago boarding houses with worse company than you. Jack's mouth twitched, almost a smile. He handed her a wool scarf. Wrap it twice. Wind'll cut you in half. They stepped into the storm. Extra ranch yard, night. The world had vanished. Snow came horizontal, stinging eyes, filling boot tops. The lantern Jack carried was a weak star swallowed by white. The barn loomed 20 yards away, but the distance felt like miles. They fought their way to the corral. The cattle were already moving, a dark, restless tide pressing against the north fence. Low balls rose above the wind, fear, not hunger. Jack cupped his hands. Clara. Open the barn doors. Clara's face appeared at an upstairs window, a pale oval. She vanished. Moments later the big doors slid wide, spilling golden light into the blizzard. Jack and Evie worked without words. Jack cut the wire on the corral gate, Evie swung it open. The cattle surged, instinctive, toward the barn's promise of shelter. Jack on buck, coat flapping like a sail, ropes a yearling calf tangled in driftwood. The rope burns his gloves, he doesn't feel it. Evie on Bible, hair whipping free of its pins, drives a cluster of steers away from the ravine's edge. Her scarf is a red flag in the whiteout. A gust snatches Jack's hat, it sails into darkness. He doesn't chase it. Evie's hands go numb on the reins. She switches to her teeth, guiding Bible with knee pressure alone. Lightning cracks, rare in snowstorms, illuminating the herd in stark silhouette. Thunder rolls like God clearing his throat. Extra ravine's edge, later. The last cow stumbles into the barn. Clara bars the doors behind them, her face streaked with snow and tears. Clara. That's all? Counting. 61. One missing. He is already swinging back into the saddle. The storm has eased to a steady roar, but visibility is still nil. Evie. I'll come. No. Stay with Clara. Evie. Sharp. Don't you dare die before you apologize properly. The words whip out, raw and fierce. Jack's head snaps toward her. For a heartbeat the storm is background noise. Soft, almost lost. Yes ma'am. They ride out together. XD. Blizzard. Continuous. The missing cow is a young heifer, half-grown, bawling near the ravine. She's tangled in a fallen cottonwood, one leg twisted. Jack dismounts, knees sinking to his thighs. He loops a rope around the heifer's neck. Evie joins him, breath heaving. Together they heave. The cow lows in pain. The tree shifts, then crashes down, pinning Jack's right leg beneath a limb thick as a man's waist. Jack's roar is swallowed by wind. Evie drops to her knees, digging with bare hands. Snow packs under her nails. Evie. Jack. Can you feel your toes? Jack. Through gritted teeth. Like fire. Get the limb off. She casts around. Spots a fence rail half buried nearby. Uses it as a lever, muscle screaming. The limb lifts an inch, 2. Jack drags his leg free, face gray. Evie. Can you ride? Jack. Have to. He mounts with her help, teeth clenched so hard she hears them grind. The heifer limps between them, roped to Buck's saddle horn. XD barn, dawn approaching. The storm is spent, leaving a world scoured clean. Stars fade overhead. The barn doors stand open, light spilling like warm honey. Clara runs out in her nightgown and boots, hair loose down her back. Clara. Thank God. She helps Jack down. His leg buckles, Evie catches him. Together they limp inside. Barn, moments later. Hay smells sweet after the storm's metallic bite. The cattle are bedded, steaming gently. Clara fetches blankets, hot coffee laced with whiskey. Jack sits on a hay bale, legs stretched out. Evie kneels, cutting away his boot with a jackknife. The ankle is already swelling purple. Evie. Quiet to Clara. Splint and wrap. No weight on it for a week. Clara. Christmas in bed. Merry tidings. Jack tries to stand, sways. Evie presses him back. Evie. Stay put, cowboy. Their eyes lock. Snowmelt drips from her hair onto his wrist, warm as tears. Horse. You saved my hide. Evie. We're even. You saved mine 12 years ago when I fell through the ice on the creek. You remember that? Evie. I remember everything. Clara watches from the doorway, blanket forgotten in her hands. The barn feels suddenly small, the air thick with things unsaid. Outside, the first pale hint of Christmas dawn touches the snow. Inside, two people who had spent a decade apart discover that some fires burn hotter for having been banked so long. The heifer lows softly, content. Somewhere in the loft, Judas the cat opens one eye, decides the drama is over and goes back to sleep. The firelight confession. The storm had spent itself, leaving only a soft, steady snowfall that tapped the windows like a patient visitor. Inside the Triple Bar Ranch house, the parlor clock struck 2 in the morning, its chime thin and silver in the hush. The room glowed with the low, steady heartbeat of the fireplace. Embers painted the walls in shifting amber, and the scent of pine resin and coffee lingered from the pot Clara had left warming on the hearth. Jack Holliday lay on the settee, his splinted leg propped on a folded quilt. The swelling had eased under Evie's firm wrapping, but pain still flickered across his face whenever he shifted. A wool blanket was tucked around his shoulders. His dark hair was damp from melted snow, curling at the collar. Evie sat on the braided rug before the fire, knees drawn up, skirt pooled around her like spilled ink. She had removed Clara's borrowed coat and now wore one of Jack's old flannel shirts over her dress, too large, sleeves rolled to the elbow. The grass ring circled her smallest finger like a fragile crown. Clara slept in the Boston rocker, head tilted against a cushion, a half-finished sock darning in her lap. Her breathing was slow and even, the sleep of the bone-weary. The fire popped. A coal rolled forward and died in a puff of ash. Jack's voice came low, rough from disuse and whiskey-laced coffee. "Jack, you still play?" He nodded toward the upright piano in the corner, Pa's pride, its walnut case scarred from generations of boots and children's elbows. The ivory keys were yellowed, but the felt hammers were new. Jack had replaced them himself the winter Clara turned 21. Evie. Soft. Every Sunday in Chicago. Church choir needed a soprano who could reach high C without cracking. She flexed her fingers, the grass ring caught the light. Evie. Your turn. Do you still whittle? Jack's mouth curved, the closest thing to a smile he'd managed since the ravine. Jack. Carved a whole nativity last year. Clara says the donkey looks drunk. Evie. Show me. He hesitated, then reached under the settee and drew out a small cedar box. Inside, wrapped in flannel, lay a palm-sized Mary and Joseph. The figures were simple, almost childlike, but the curve of Mary's hand over the empty manger was tender enough to ache. Evie turned the carving in her fingers. Evie. You gave her my mother's eyes. Jack. Quiet. Couldn't help it. Silence folded around them again, softer now. Outside, snow slid from the eaves with a gentle whump. Evie set the figures back in their nest of cloth. Her hand brushed Jack's, neither moved away. Evie. Whisper. I kept your letters. All 42. She reached into the carpet bag at her feet, the same one she'd carried off the train, and drew out a bundle tied with faded blue ribbon. The paper was soft from handling, edges worn translucent. She laid it on the quilt between them. Jack stared as if it were a live thing. Jack. I stopped writing after the first year. Figured you'd burn mine. Evie. I did. Then I wrote you new ones in my head every night for 10 years. Never mailed a single one. She untied the ribbon. The top letter unfolded itself, creases deep as scars. October 15, 1877. Dearest Jack. The leaves here turn red like the bandana you wore the day we raced to the ridge. I hate them. They mock me. I hate everything that isn't Montana dirt under my nails. Jack's throat worked. He reached out, stopped short of touching the page. Jack. I burned yours. Every last one. Then dug the ashes out of the stove like a fool. Kept them in a tin under my bunk. Still smell like smoke and lilac water. Evie's eyes filled. She blinked hard, a tear slipped free and traced a path through the soot on her cheek. Evie. I married a banker to spite you. His name was Harold. He was kind in the way rich men are kind, distant like charity. Died of fever 2 years ago in a house with 14 rooms and no laughter. I buried him in a plot overlooking Lake Michigan and felt nothing. Not even relief. She looked at the fire, not at Jack. Evie. I thought I'd never feel home again. Until the train crossed the Montana line and the air smelled like pine and snow and you. Jack's hand covered hers on the quilt. His palm was warm, calloused, trembling just enough to betray him. Jack. I thought home was this dirt under my nails. Turns out it's the sound of your voice telling me I'm wrong. Evie turned her hand palm up, lacing their fingers. The grass ring pressed between them, brittle but unbroken. Evie. We were so young. Jack. Young enough to be stupid. Old enough to know better now. Another log settled in the grate, sending up a shower of sparks. Clara stirred in the rocker, murmured something about angels and slept on. Evie leaned closer until her forehead nearly touched Jack's knee. Evie. I came back for Clara's ad. But I stayed for the man who rode into a blizzard to save a half-grown cow. Jack. I rode into that blizzard because you were beside me. Been running from empty since the day you left. Didn't know how tired I was till you showed up and made the quiet loud again. Evie lifted her head. Firelight painted gold in her eyes. Evie. What do we do with 12 years of hurt, Jack? Jack. We start with tonight. One truth at a time. He reached with his free hand and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. His thumb lingered at the corner of her mouth. Jack. Truth, I never stopped loving you. Just got real good at pretending I didn't need to. Evie's breath caught. She turned her face into his palm, lips brushing the scar that ran across his lifeline. Evie. Truth, I forgave you the moment I saw you standing in the wagon yard, snow in your hair, looking like every prayer I never dared say out loud. The clock ticked. The fire settled into steady coals. Somewhere in the kitchen, the coffee pot gave a final, contented gurgle. Jack's voice dropped to a murmur meant only for her. Stay, Evie. Not for Clara's ad. Not for Christmas. Stay because the ranch is big enough for two stubborn hearts and the years we lost can be the foundation we build on. Evie searched his face, every line, every shadow, every flicker of hope he was too proud to name. Evie. Only if you promise to dance with me at the harvest social, Jack Holliday. Even if your boots are full of manure. A laugh rumbled out of him, rusty but real. He tugged her hand until she rose and settled carefully on the settee beside him, mindful of the splinted leg. She fit against his side the way a key fits a lock neither knew was waiting. Deal. But I lead. Evie. We'll see. They stayed like that, hip to hip, hands entwined, watching the fire burn low. The grass ring caught the last glow and held it like a secret. Upstairs, Clara's dreams shifted. She smiled without waking. Outside, Christmas morning crept closer on silent, snowy feet, bringing with it the scent of pine and possibility. Inside, two people who had spent a decade learning how to live without each other began, tentatively, to remember how to live with. The wish under the stars. Christmas morning arrived like a held breath finally released. The storm had scoured the sky clean. It arched overhead now, a bowl of pale rose and robin's egg blue, so clear the stars seemed embarrassed to linger and slipped away one by one. Snow lay in unbroken drifts, deep enough to swallow a man's knee, bright enough to sting the eyes. Inside the triple bar house, the stove cracked and popped, sending the smell of cinnamon and frying salt pork down the hallway. Clara hummed Joy to the World, off-key while turning flapjacks the size of wagon wheels. She had been up since 4, stoking fires, setting the table with the good china, 3 plates with only 1 chip between them, and sneaking glances at the parlor settee where Jack and Evie had finally fallen asleep, still holding hands like children afraid of nightmares. Jack woke first. His leg throbbed, but the pain felt distant, muffled by wonder. Evie's head rested on his shoulder. Her breath stirred the open collar of his shirt. The grass ring glinted on her finger, catching a shaft of early light that slipped through the curtains. He did not move. He was afraid the moment would shatter. Evie stirred, lashes fluttering. For a heartbeat she looked 16 again, sleep-soft, unguarded. Then memory returned. Her eyes found his and held. Evie. Whisper. Merry Christmas, Jack Holliday. Merry Christmas, Evie Lawson. Outside, a rooster that had survived the storm crowed once, hoarse but triumphant. Clara's voice floated in. Clara. If you two are done courting the sunrise, breakfast is hot and the coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe. They laughed, quiet, conspiratorial, and disentangled. Jack tested his splinted leg. It held. Evie offered her arm. He took it. The kitchen was a riot of warmth and clutter. The table groaned under platters. Flapjacks, crisp pork, eggs scrambled with chives, a jar of chokecherry jelly Clara had hoarded since August. A small pine tree stood in the corner, Jack's doing from 2 nights ago, decorated with popcorn strings, paper stars, and the mail-order bride ad curled into a scroll and tied with red ribbon. Clara caught them staring. Clara figured it earned its place on the tree. Kindling for next year's fire. Jack's ears went pink. Evie hid a smile behind her coffee cup. They ate until the platters were empty and the talk turned easy. Ranch plans, the price of hay, whether the creek would freeze solid enough for skating. Jack's hand found Evie's under the table. Her thumb traced the scar on his knuckles like reading Braille. After breakfast, Clara shooed them outside. Clara. Go sit on the porch. Doctor's orders. Fresh air for the leg, fresh start for the heart. A ranch porch, late morning. The world sparkled. Sunlight struck the snow and flung it back in a million tiny knives of light. The porch rails wore caps of white thick as wedding cake frosting. Jack limped out with the aid of a broom handle crutch Clara had fashioned from kindling. Evie followed, carrying 2 mugs of coffee laced with a finger of whiskey for medicinal purposes. They settled on the top step, shoulders touching. Breath plumed and mingled. Jack set his mug down and reached into his coat pocket. He drew out a small box no bigger than a snuff tin, carved from cedar and polished until it glowed. A tiny latch held it shut. Found this in Pa's things last week. He carved it the year you left. Said, for when the right girl comes back. Figured he meant Clara. Turns out he knew better. He flipped the latch. Inside, nestled on a scrap of faded velvet, lay a ring. Simple gold, worn thin in places, etched with a delicate line of 5-point stars. Evie. Soft gasp. That's your mother's wedding band. She wore it 42 years. Pa added the stars the winter I was born. one for every year he'd waited to marry her. Said love was patient work. He took the ring between thumb and forefinger. The gold caught the sun and held it. Evie Lawson, I've got 62 head of cattle, 61 if that heifer doesn't pull through, a mortgage that'll outlive me, a sister who meddles worse than a magpie, and a heart that's been waiting 12 years to finish what we started on a creek bank in 1876. He shifted to one knee, awkward with the splint but steady. Will you marry me? Not because a foolish ad brought you here, but because every mile between then and now was just the long way home. Evie's eyes filled so fast the tears spilled before she could blink them back. They froze on her cheeks in tiny crystals. Evie? Yes. But only if we face the next storm together. And if you let me lead one dance. Jack laughed, full-throated, the sound rolling across the snow like bells. Deal. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit over the grass band as if it had always belonged there. The stars caught the light and scattered it across the snow in bright, fleeting constellations. Behind them the screen door creaked. Clara stepped out, apron dusted with flour, eyes suspiciously bright. Clara. Well, don't keep an old maid in suspense. Evie held up her hand. The two rings, one gold, one grass, glinted side by side. Clara whooped loud enough to startle a magpie from the cottonwood. She darted forward, hugged them both until Jack's crutch clattered to the porch boards. Clara. Church socials at 4. I'm telling Reverend Hale to dust off the wedding service. And I'm burning that ad for kindling tonight. Let the fire have the last word. She disappeared inside, already planning. Jack and Evie stayed on the step. The sun climbed higher. The snow began to drip from the eaves in slow, deliberate tears. Evie, think we can make it to the ravine by spring? I want to see the wildflowers where you carved our initials. We'll make it. I've got a strong woman and a stronger promise this time. He tilted her chin and kissed her, slow, deliberate, tasting coffee and chokecherry in every forgiven year. When they parted, their foreheads stayed touching. In the distance, the Silver Creek church bell began to ring, calling the faithful to Christmas service. The notes floated across the white fields, clear and unafraid. Clara appeared again, this time with Jack's Sunday coat and Evie's green cloak. Clara. Sleigh's hitched. Buck and Bible are itching to show off. Let's go tell the town the prodigal bride came home for good. Jack stood leaning on Evie. Together they descended the steps. The snow accepted their footprints side by side, no space between. At the bottom Jack paused and looked back. The porch railing bore 2 fresh handprints in the snow, his larger, hers smaller, pressed close enough to overlap. He smiled. Soft. Wish granted. Evie followed his gaze, then squeezed his arm. Evie. Some wishes just take the long road. They climbed into the sleigh. Clara took the reins, clucked to the horses. Bells on the harness jingled like laughter. The runners hissed over the snow, carving a single, perfect track toward town, toward church, toward forever. Behind them, the ranch house stood quiet under its blanket of white, smoke curling from the chimney and lazy question marks that the wind erased one by one. Ahead, the future opened wide as the Montana sky, big enough for second chances, for star-etched rings, for 2 hearts learning the same old dance with new, steady feet. Fade out on the sleigh gliding into the sunrise, bells fading into the hush of Christmas morning, the only sound left the soft, certain rhythm of promises finally kept.